Ready to take your verdicts and jury selection to the next level? Jury consultant Harry Plotkin and trial lawyer Dan Kramer are your ticket to tipping the scales before trial begins. You're not just picking a jury, you're picking justice. Produced and powered by LawPods.
Welcome back to another episode of Picking Justice. Man, Harry, I was listening to some of these great guests we have. You know, it's been almost 6 months now we've been doing this podcast, and I keep learning new stuff. It's great. It's great. And I don't like watching the video because I noticed I was fidgeting too much. So I'm going to stop doing that. Try to stop doing that.
Just stay still. Just lock yourself in there. Yeah.
Yeah, like I'm tied to a podium like some of these judges make us. Anyway, it's been great. So many great guests. We're so thankful for all these wonderful people, and thanks for all the great feedback and the ideas that we're getting from you all. Please keep sending them because we want to help everyone pick better juries. And
send questions. I mean, for our viewers, send questions, shoot us emails. We'd love to hear if you guys are going to trial and trying some of these techniques, what you're liking and hearing about some great stories, you know, questions for future guests, topics that you'd like to hear about. We love hearing about that kind of stuff. And so that's a big part of the feedback for us doing this is to motivate, you know, lawyers to get better verdicts and pick better juries. And so if it's working, we love hearing about it.
Yeah. Absolutely. Today, there is no guest. You just get Harry and I, but we're going to break down something that actually Harry and I have coming up here. We are about to start trial together, and I was going through the judge's rules with Harry just to kind of get a feel for what he does during voir dire, and I came across a paragraph that was hidden in a very long trial order that says he gives usually about 20-minute voir dire for 35 jurors, Harry, and I was not a fan of that statement. And so today we're going to talk about how do you deal with that? How do you deal with the 20-minute voir dire? First, how do you deal with it to try to get more? And then if the judge is not going to budge, how do you talk to 35 jurors in 20 minutes, Harry? And I know you see this in certain counties quite a bit, don't you?
I do. And honestly, it's almost worse than some of my federal juries because when you get a federal trial and a judge does give you a little bit of voir dire time, I've seen, like you get 10 or 15 minutes, which sounds like less, right? But sometimes that's you're voir diring 14 people in 15 minutes. At least that's a minute per person. 20 minutes for 35 people is like, hey, what's your favorite ice cream? Okay, I ran out of time. So, but it's one of my favorite things to teach because it can be done. I've done it a million times. It's not ideal, but unfortunately, from what I'm seeing, it's like it's happening more and more these days as these judges just feel this pressure to move these trials along and they don't like, I don't know, I think some judges, feel like when they see lawyers voir diring jurors, they don't like some of the things that they're seeing. And so they're like, I'm going to stop this lawyer from preconditioning the jury or using tricks to get rid of jurors for cause. They don't like it. So, I think for some judges, it's here to stay, like less and less time, even though, honestly, 30 minutes less of voir dire is not going to save a lot of time in the trial. It's going to save 30 minutes. So it's not like these trials are going to run a week longer because of voir dire.
Yeah. What do you think the right amount of time is? What do you think the reasonable amount of time is? I
think most judges would like my perspective because I also believe you shouldn't bore them and take a ton of time. I don't think, when judges say, hey, you're going to talk to the first 18 jurors, how much time do you think? I think an hour is plenty, but that's still over 3 minutes per person. And so one thing I know that we're going to at least try, Dan, and I've done it in other cases and with some success and with some judges and not with others is, filing a declaration for me as a jury expert, but whoever, basically saying, hey, this case has a lot of unique personal issues, sensitive issues, controversial issues. And so we need more time and I always say at least, 3 to 5 minutes per person, depending on how many issues there are and how sensitive they are. If you're going to spend all day long, like, voir diring 18 jurors, the jurors are going to start hating you.
Yeah.
And honestly, after the first hour or an hour and a half, like you're not learning new things. You should be able to figure out. Then you're just wasting time. If you get too much time, you're going to waste time and the jurors are going to probably hate you for it. But I think 3 minutes per person is anything less than that is tough.
I think, and that's a good way to frame it because the judges just always do just in the aggregate 20 minutes. But I think if you really, when you break it down like that and you break down how little, we have 20 minutes for 35 people. I'm not that good at, not as good at math as you, but
You get what, 40 seconds or something?
yeah,
Or,
40 seconds to, I mean, it goes against what the code says. You know, you really got to be
Yeah.
able to ask probing questions. How can you do that in 40 seconds with 35 people? But look, this is our plight here, Harry. So approaching it, obviously, you and I came up with a strategy on voir dire before we had that information. It's kind of a newer judge, came from criminal, actually, which may be part of like that philosophy, I imagine, right?
Yeah, that's what I hear. A lot of criminal judges, even though, you know, if it's a capital murder case, sometimes it takes like 2 weeks to pick that jury. But in your, what's the word I'm looking for? Your you know, standard criminal trial, yeah, it's like, you know, trials lasting like a day or two. And so like jury selection is just an afterthought. So I think we are seeing that. But one thing I always say is like, okay, even though I'm not a big fan of having the judge ask a ton of the voir dire questions, because, you know, jurors don't really speak up to judges, you know, like how a lawyer asks a question, you get a very different response from jurors because nobody wants to tell the judge, like, I can't be fair. But I think in cases where you're really limited, you know, I say submit as many questions as you can to the judge too, just because that's at least going to give you more time and more information, you know? So
yeah,
that's step one.
That's exactly. And that's what we just filed it. We just sent a long list. Harry put together a great list for us of questions to ask. And you know, what's funny, the defense objected and saying counsel should be able to ask all these questions. Plaintiff's counsel can ask these questions and ask all these questions. So I'm like, Your Honor, look, I mean, they're recommending that we have time to ask the questions. The defense stipulates, like, allow me to ask all these.
Right.
I'm
yeah.
hoping.
I mean, and the questions that I would submit to a judge are not, I would only submit questions that are pretty black and white, like things that you're looking for red flags with jurors. Like they're basically experience questions. Like, has anyone here ever, you know, owned or worked for a business that's been negatively impacted by lawsuits? You know, has anyone here ever seen somebody fake an injury? You know, it's like yes or no, because jurors will answer those questions and judges usually will be comfortable asking those kind of questions. You know, I really don't like to submit questions to judges that are like, you know, does anyone feel like this or that? I mean, judges don't like to ask them. And even when they do, jurors are never I just don't see jurors raise their hands when judges ask them, like, anyone have a bias about this or that? And so I think for those questions, you just want to get out all the information, because judges they're going to naturally kind of like neuter your questions, and they're going to add something like, you know, has anyone had an experience that makes you unable to be fair? And then just adding that last part of it kind of shuts people up.
Yeah.
So, you know, so I know in our case, and I know in all these cases, like you just collect information. It's just like a jury questionnaire, but have the judge do it basically. And hopefully the judge will do it, but
okay,
we'll
but
any indication yet?
No.
No? Okay.
I mean, no, nothing yet. I'll find out soon. But okay, hypothetically, let's imagine the judge shuts down a request. And one thing that I know you did this recently with Nick Rowley in a trial in Colorado, because I know Colorado has very limited. My buddy Kurt Zahner out there, just, you know, I talked to him about voir dire. He's like, we barely get any voir dire out there.
It's like 20 minutes there.
20 minutes, like, but across the board, right? I mean, it's just everywhere, and judges don't budge on it.
Oh yeah, you're opening by 10:30 in the morning.
Yeah.
Imagine that.
But you, in the case you had with Nick Rowley out there, so you submit a declaration for the judge. What do you sort of lay out in that declaration?
Basically, it is letting the judge know, hey, this is not your run-of-the-mill case. First, I got to build a little credibility by telling the judge, you know, maybe a lot of times in your very typical case, 20 minutes is fine, but this case has a bunch of very personal issues or sensitive issues or controversial issues, and I'll list them out there. And I'll also say, you know, I found that jurors, I mean, group questioning really is not going to get them comfortable expressing these things, and we got to talk about these things. And so the first thing I suggest is a jury questionnaire. And that's great. I mean, the judge grants that, that's great. And that, you know, that doesn't take a bunch of court time to do it. But then I say, short of that, it's going to take individual questioning. And, you know, with the number of these issues here, you know, I think it's got to be at least 3 to 5 minutes per person. And then I kind of tell the judge, like, you know, so depending on how many, I play dumb and say, depending on how many people you have them question. I mean, if you have them question the first 12 jurors, that would be this much time, or if it's the whole room, it could be this much time. And so, you know, luckily in that case, our judge went from the 20 minutes and he gave us, I think I asked for 5 minutes in that case. And that's what he gave us. He gave us, I think we questioned 18 jurors at first, and he said, okay, I'm going to give you 90 minutes, which was 5 minutes per person, which is perfect.
Wow.
So I think you got to tell them, you kind of got to ask for something else. You got to ask for a jury questionnaire and say, that's the best way of getting this. But short of that, we just need more time. But you really have to get into the specifics and say, Your Honor, here are the issues that are really a lot more personal and sensitive or embarrassing or controversial, So if you have you're talking about racism, or if you're talking about immigration, or you're talking about people's sensitive medical, histories, or whatever it is. I mean, you got to convince the judge, like, this isn't just some standard typical case with the normal stuff.
But what if it is? What if you don't have anything salacious in it?
Well, I mean, it doesn't have to be salacious. I mean, there's a bunch of different categories, personal, sensitive. I mean, it doesn't have to be a sex abuse case. That's probably the most extreme example where people don't want to talk about it. But, even in our case, I think I mentioned, a bunch of issues like, people's, relationship, disabilities of family members. I mean, those things can be sensitive and personal, all kinds of things that you talk about. I mean, we talked about COVID. Yeah.
In any case, I guess you'll find issues that you need to be able to discuss more than 40 seconds with a juror.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So as long as you're kind of saying this is, I mean, and if you guys are trying bigger cases, it's probably not just a soft tissue thing. But even if you are, I mean, there are probably issues that you can find with your case or your client's, injuries or damages that are personal or embarrassing that you got to talk about.
There may be more, honestly. There may be bigger biases in those cases that you need to really root out.
Right.
All right. So the judge denies the motion or the brief and the declaration. And then, so you
got your 20 minutes. Yeah.
You got your 20 minutes.
It.
I mean, what are I imagine you cut down because, we had, I think in this trial, we had probably like 12 different kind of areas, like topics on my when I broke down the list that you put together. It's like 12 kind of areas to cover, given the type of case. It's a premises case, brain injury. So from that, how do you decide what are your top, how many areas you want to cover, and how do you go about it?
Sure. So I think the most important thing when you have a super short voir dire is you're going to have to cut way further down on your questions than you probably would ever guess. Like, honestly, it's probably might even be 2 questions, which is hard for a lot of lawyers because lawyers, Dan, you've seen some lawyers when they come in and they got their sheet and it's like 100 questions on there. And it's like, that's not going to happen. You can cut that in 10. 10 is too many. So the philosophy behind picking a jury really fast to me is the most important thing is you have to talk to everyone. You cannot sit down after that 20 minutes, look at who you want to strike and say, we didn't hear from some of these jurors. I didn't hear anything from some of these jurors other than maybe what the judge asked them about their jobs and everything. And that's tough for a lot of lawyers because a lot of lawyers like to say, well, I'm going to ask a ton of group questions and I'm going to go after bias and I'm going to they think, hey, if I did 20 minutes and I was talking with jurors the whole time and I was getting like, hey, I got 11 people for cause and the judge gave me 11 for cause. I did a great job, right? And here's the thing. Don't ever assume that silence means anything with a juror. If there are jurors who didn't say anything and you're like, well, I asked the right questions and they didn't say they have any issues and so they're not biased, they might be the worst jurors for you. Yeah. I mean, I've seen it time and again where the worst jurors for you, the most biased jurors, unless you directly ask them questions, they don't talk to you. Number one, because sometimes they don't know that they're biased. And number two, even when they do know they're biased, they're like, I mean, I've seen it a million times where like, hey, ask that guy, this question. And you ask him and he goes, oh, I'm glad you finally talked to me about that. Yeah, I'm like, and they tell you something. Actually, I think you're the biggest ambulance chasing piece of shit, and these cases are terrible. And you're like, if I had just relied on a show of hands, that guy's probably on my jury because he didn't raise his hand. So the thing I teach, no group questions. You have to talk to each juror one by one individually, and that really means you have to pick maybe one question where you talk to everybody one at a time. And if you have time, and you got it, and you can do it quickly. I'll give you an example. I picked a jury late last year with David D. Robertus in San Diego, different judge, but he gave us 30 minutes for 35 jurors, I think. And I told David, this is the one question I want you to ask everybody. I don't care if it takes you 20 minutes, that's fine. It took him like 22 minutes, but after that 22 minutes, I felt like I had a really good handle on
what was the question?
Each juror. So that one is a age disability discrimination case, and I basically had him ask, what are your feelings about whether it's okay for employers to use an employee's age and injury history to assess how their value or productivity, basically. Something along those lines. And we had some jurors going, absolutely not. And we had some jurors going, I mean, that's kind of fair. I mean, if somebody's, slowing down, I mean, or if they can't do and so it's funny because that's basically what the law is. I mean, the law says Discrimination is when you do hold those things against them.
Right.
And then after that, it's like, okay, now we have some time to ask just a couple of quick group questions and talk about damages and call on a few people. But that's all the time you really have.
Okay,
Yeah.
so you have that question, and so you had David go up there and say, like, he probably doesn't even have time to really do much on brutal honesty or biases. You kind of got to get into it pretty quick, I'm guessing.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, your 20 minutes is going to become 16 or 15 pretty quick if you give them a little preamble that doesn't really
So
get
you go quick, just like, I don't have much time. I'm going to have to go one by one and just going to ask you this one question, and then just please be brutally honest with me about how you feel. And then so he starts at like juror number 1, and then just work goes down, and just, that's literally what you
pretty
propose
much,
to do.
Yeah,
Okay.
and then just say, what are your thoughts? And if it gets boring, you can kind of throw a little wrinkle in. As the jurors are giving you things, you can throw little wrinkles in here. If they're if they're not understanding the question as much, you can kind of change it. But as long as you're hearing from everybody. And then, you may have a few quick questions. Once you've heard from everybody, then I'm like, okay, we've heard from everybody. I can assess who's good and who's bad for the most part. Then you can maybe ask some group questions about cause, and then, spend 5 minutes on like who feels this way, and still get some cause. But I think you just got to talk to everybody. If you're just focusing on cause, you're going to miss a lot of people, and you have no idea what you're going to have on your jury. And also, this, Dan, just focusing on cause is asking your jurors to self-diagnose their own biases, and jurors are just bad at that.
Especially right early in the jury selection.
Yes. Yeah.
So then would you even, because, our tendency, or at least an effective way to do it, is if someone gives you it's a biased juror, gives you an honest answer about how they feel negatively about your case or whatever you talked about, your inclination is to be like, well, does anyone else have these kind of feelings? Are you saying in the 20-minute voir dire, don't do that yet, just keep going down the list?
Yes. I mean, it depends on how much time you have.
Yeah.
20 minutes is enough. If you move quickly enough, you could do it in easily, I'm just trying to think. So it took David about 20, it took him a little bit over 20 minutes to get 35. So you do the math there. Ideally, I'd like to have, at least 5 or 7 minutes left after asking that one question where you can go, okay, now cover a few topics.
On damages.
Talk about damages. And for that, it's easy. I was like, okay, David, I just wrote him, maybe 5 or 6 or 7 jurors. Okay, just talk to damages about these 5 or 6 people. These are the ones that I'm, because everybody, by that time, I'm like, I know who I really like. I know who we definitely don't like. There's some people in the middle who we really need to get a better read on, maybe, and ask a couple other questions and just fill in the time. And I think ideally in a short voir dire, you do save at least a few more minutes and just kind of rapid fire say, hey, I don't have a lot of time here, so I'm going to go quickly and, and just throw a few potential bias type questions their way. Everyone experienced this, anyone feel this way, anyone feel this way. Silence is fine at that point, because no one's going to sneak. If you've talked to them already about a really important question, then they're not going to sneak by you. Yeah.
And I guess instead of asking the group question of you have a bad juror who is very against you, instead of doing anyone else have similar feelings, I think you just keep going down the list and be like, juror number 5, you just heard from juror number 4. Do you feel like that way? I think you can just keep going down the list, because I think the fear of only 20 minutes is if you open it back up, then you're going to get a lot of people you maybe have already heard from, and then you're going to skip over people. And then by that point, you're going to lose track of time, especially if you don't have a consultant with you or someone with you. And then you are sitting down and you haven't talked to 7 jurors.
Yeah. And they'll tell you as they're going down the line, I kind of feel like this juror over here, this gentleman, or I kind of feel like a little more like this person. They'll comment on each other's answers, and most of them will go quickly. I can tell you, your perfect jurors will give you pretty short answers. The perfect jurors will be like, they absolutely have to do this, whatever your question is. How much, whether, companies have to retest products when they're finding out there's issues with them, or blah, blah, blah. And the good ones will be like, absolutely. And you're like, thank you. And then you move on. The bad jurors will tell you, I hear this every time. I always have at least one juror who says, this kind of question is stupid, and this is this is not so black and white and everything. And it happened in David's case. It happened, I know another one recently where we're like, thank you. No, and I'm always like, it's so funny because it was a great question. It identified a really bad juror that we're going to strike. Because when they tell you, well, this is not so simple, they're telling you how they feel. Because a good juror will say, absolutely, companies should have to do this, or employers should have to do this. And when they equivocate and act like it's too complicated. I had a juror recently in a case that used the word in voir dire 3 different times in 3 different contexts, used the word gray. Well, that's a gray area. And we're like, and it's funny. She was like, she talked about, it was really funny. She talked about like, well, we're like, has anyone here ever seen a company engaging in wrongdoing and just sort of felt like you had to keep it to yourself. And she was like, yeah, when I was a young employee in the housing bubble, she's like, I saw some gray area stuff, but I was young, and it was like there were some unsavory practices. And I'm thinking, this lady doesn't think that the subprime mortgage thing that's a gray area to her. That's a pretty horrible. She's not gonna think that this company in our case, did something wrong. So they tell you a lot with how much they equivocate too.
Well,
but
in
it's
the
tough,
yeah. Well, in the interest of being quick and short here, let me throw little bit of rapid fire at you on types of cases, and you have 20 minutes. What are the two or three things? And I imagine number 3 is probably going to be very similar, the number 3 question. But let's say you got, rear-end car crash, sympathetic defendant.
For that case, anytime you're suing an individual, that's a big part of your voir dire.
That's number 1?
Well, it depends on the fact. I mean, to me, if I'm going to have the one question that takes up most of the time that I'm going to ask everybody, it's going to be an open-ended question that tells you how pissed off is this person going to get or not at what the defendant did. And so it probably is not going to be that question about like, how do you feel about suing an individual defendant? That's really important. I mean, that's the hard thing, is that you're going to have to cut good questions.
I know.
You got 20 minutes,
that's
you're going to have to cut
asking.
good questions. So I would have to see the case. There may be a case where it's like, that's, hey, that is the most important question, and nothing else is really that important if it's admitted liability. But I would say generally it should be something that goes to liability. And I'll tell you, even admitted liability matters. In other words, like, it's an admitted liability case. It doesn't matter how people feel about careless driving. Like that's total BS. Like, your best jurors are people who are going to be like, I don't like careless driving. And jurors who are like, it's not that big a deal, they're going to be bad for you. So I think you have to voir dire a little bit on liability issues, even in admitted liability cases. That tells you way more than anything. But
on that note, I mean, I think this is a really important point, because we always do on our admitted liability, talk about this. Like, what are some of the questions you formulate for that when it's admitted liability to address, unsafe drivers?
Right. It depends on the nature of the case. I mean, it depends on, if it's I recently did a trial that was disputed liability, but it was we were not worried about liability. It was like, we can't believe this truck driver is not admitting it. But still, even though we know every juror is going to probably find for us on liability, I still wanted to talk about the idea of, how do you feel about truck drivers? Do they have an obligation to, be extra cautious and have extra room? Or are they just like everybody else? Is that unfair? And so, questions like that to kind of get you a sense of like, who's going to be pissed off that this truck driver, rear-ended somebody, and who's going to be like, it happens. I mean, trucks can't brake that fast. Maybe somebody cuts them off. It's just part of truck driving.
Yeah. Or they have a hard job. Other drivers should be more careful around truck drivers.
Yeah.
No, exactly. That's good. I mean, I always like the questions you kind of propose when we're trying an auto case. It's that who here kind of drove here today and, maybe rolled a couple stop signs, or who's like 10 and 2 and very, focus, like never goes above the speed limit, like trying to find out who's kind of on both camps there. I sort of like that question, because then you find out who are the very conscientious, safe drivers, because they're probably going to be get more angry at the careless driver, right?
They usually do, yeah. It depends. I mean, yeah, one of those questions about just like safety is a choice, are really important in those kind of cases, because I always worry about jurors. There are some jurors who are just like, crashes are just accidents. Like, it's not intentional. And I really want to make sure that we get jurors thinking like, no, driving carefully is a choice that we make. Driving not so carefully is a choice we make. And so talking to them about like, what precautions do you take, if any, as a driver? And they talk about it, and they're all kind of thinking about what safe drivers they are. And then you say, do you feel like, driving carefully is a choice we make, or just an accident or something? And they're like, no, that's a choice, and you go. And then you talk about negligence a little bit, and you can say negligence is not just an accident, and so that definitely gets the piss off factor going in these cases, because it's not just like what your piss off points are in trial. It's also jury selection for me is just a huge exercise in trying to figure out like who is going to get pissed off more and who's just not going to get that pissed off by whatever the facts are.
Yeah.
I mean, jurors are not robots. Yeah. Jurors are not robots who follow the law all the same way. And, A plus B equals liability, and so therefore it's the damages. Like, it's a big deal for them. And so you could have a juror who is like perfectly fine, like no biases, but like, to me, if they're not going to get upset, if they don't have a really strong conscience about what the defendant did, they're not my ideal juror. So
how do you find out through your questions, if it's a juror that's going to be one that's going to be really angry at the defendant's conduct, but still keep them on and they don't get kicked for cause? How do you balance that fine line?
You don't have to. It's funny the way that when you ask these open-ended questions where you're not saying like, are you A or B? You're just like, what are your thoughts? Most defense lawyers do not do a very good job of knowing what any of that information means.
Yeah.
They also delude themselves a lot into thinking like, well, that's a good answer for me. Sometimes they get up there and then they try to make some other point with that same juror. And you're like, that didn't do anything. But they're like, well, but you would agree that this and that, like, in this situation, that it would be this person's fault. And they're like, well, yeah. And you're like, okay, well, but that person's still going to be pissed off if we show them that this company did something wrong. So I don't worry too much about that. I don't think if you were asking open-ended questions with no right or wrong answers and they're just telling you how you feel, that usually doesn't conclusively show the defense that they're biased for you or anything.
What are some of the cues you look for to find out if a person's going to be an angry juror?
I think for me, one of them is just like how quickly and conclusively they answer. When you ask a question, they're like, absolutely. That for me is good, as opposed to, well, it depends. The more they equivocate and the more they're like, well, this is a gray area, or I need more information. That's a bad thing, but just really strong view. If they have really high standards and expectations, I'm like, that's a good juror.
Yeah, they're not going to give any slack.
Exactly. I had one trial I remember last year where we asked, what are your thoughts about whether, hospitals should have to investigate every single allegation of, anything wrong, like bad, medicine or whatever it was, or is that too much? Is that ridiculous and everything? And the best jurors were like, no, and they were, giving us great things like nothing is more important than patient safety and blah, blah, blah. And the bad ones were like, in theory, the bad jurors would say things like, in a perfect world, yes, but how, and I remember one juror said, like, he gave a ridiculous answer. He was like, a small company, yes, but the bigger companies, there's more. It was weird. It was like, you'd think that he would say, well, they have more resources, but he actually said there's just so many employees and so many things, and that's just impossible to do it.
And I think that's like, some of the questions you've written for me on premises cases where we don't have as much time is, should a business follow the minimum safety standards? Do you think that's enough, or do you think they should look into how they can be more safe or something like that? I don't have it memorized right now, but it's generally the idea of, you want to find out the people who are like, look, if they're following the safety standards, even just the minimum basic rules, then that's fine. Businesses are hard to run. They can't keep every square inch safe. So you really want to find like the people who are like, oh, it's tough to run a business, right? Isn't that kind of the goal of those questions?
Yeah, exactly. And the ones who are just not going to get mad when they did the minimum and they find out, hey, somebody still got hurt, but they're like, all you have to do is, a company's just supposed to follow what they're told, what the rules are, and not do anything more. And good jurors will say, no, you have a responsibility to go above and beyond and actually figure out if the rules are safe enough or not. Because some jurors will just say, hey, if this product was approved by the FDA, what the hell are we doing here? It's like, it's not their fault. And some people are like, wait, but you got all these complaints and injuries and you didn't do a single thing. And so, that's where you're trying to figure out like, who's going to get angry, who's going to get not. And so talking about company responsibility and how should they handle, one of my favorite kind of questions is like, when this kind of thing happens, what are your thoughts about how companies should handle it? Like I did that in my last trial. How do you think they should handle it when customers they're getting lots of customer complaints and returns? What if anything should they have to do? How should they handle it? And some people were like, every product gets complaints. It doesn't mean anything. And some jurors were like, they should recall that product and not sell it until they investigate and everything. There's obviously something wrong. You'd be surprised at the wide range of what people think and how defense, lawyers, and in that case, the defense lawyers didn't like strike the good people. They just like,
well, because I don't think that is, because it's not really, you're right. It's more of, okay, so you asked the question, some folks think that businesses should do more than the minimum safety requirements. Others think businesses such as restaurants, should do the best they can, are doing the best they can if they're following the safety minimum requirements. And that's fine. They don't need to do more. I think if someone is in kind of the group A where they should go above and beyond, I don't think that's bias. If they're just if they're just saying, no, they should make sure everything's kept safe. It's their product. And then, you're going to find, especially when you have a restaurant case, you're going to find a lot of people who are like, restaurants are busy, like there's a lot of other customers, like they shouldn't. And then you want to find out, should they have to anticipate unsafe behavior by customers or the public? Or is that something that's just kind of not really on the restaurant? You're going to find a lot of people who've worked. I used to work in restaurants, you're going to find a lot of people who are going to equivocate, like you said, kind of be like the gray area and be like, look, restaurants are busy. You can't blame the restaurant for everything. But if the people who are emphatic, like they should keep it safe, that's the pissed off juror that you're looking for that's not going to be bumped or they shouldn't be bumped for cause by the defense.
No, definitely not for cause. I'm just saying that if the defense was smart, they would strike. I think they would strike those folks.
Yeah.
But if you're asking, if you're in an okay venue and you're asking the questions right, you're going to get more than one person saying that. You're going to get a bunch saying, I kind of agree with that. And it's a whole spectrum of folks, but usually they can't strike all those folks. If it was me, I'm on the defense, I'm probably going to strike the ones who give the best answers. But, what they do instead is they come back there and they say, well, and they ask some other question like, yeah, but wouldn't you agree that if this, and then they make some other point and they expect these jurors like, well, they're going to be fine because we're going to prove our case to them. And they don't imagine what would happen if this juror was convinced that the company actually did something wrong. I had a trial recently where our foreperson sounded kind of bad in voir dire. If you kind of just took what she was saying at the surface level, it was a slip and fall case. And she was like, hey, I worked at Costco for years. And, she was like, it depends on the intent. Like, if the company's trying their best, there's, companies can't always prevent these things. Or like, if a customer spills a water and somebody slips like a minute later and that's not on Costco. And she's like, and if the company is doing its best, like she was like, we had the system. And she was like, there were times when I stood over a spill for like 20 minutes while, keeping customers away. And I'm hearing that and I'm going like, okay, so she just told us, number one, she cares a lot about customer safety. She expects these companies to actually, when they actually have a chance to do something responsible. And she's saying like the intent matters. Like what matters to me is like how much of these companies actually seem to care about doing the right thing. And she ended up being great for it. She was a foreperson in this case and wanted to give like way more money than some of the other jurors was pushing for more money. Even though the hospital in this case was saying like, oh, the spill was only there. Nobody saw the spill and there's nothing we could have done. And we take safety seriously and all that kind of usual BS. They don't imagine like what would happen if, you convince these jurors. So I'm thinking how these jurors are going to be in our best day. Like, if you prove your case, I want people who are going to get pissed off.
Yeah. If you get on a slip and fall, if you get someone that says they as soon as they see a spill, they stand over it for 20 minutes, that's pretty good. That's a great.
But I guarantee the defense love that juror.
Oh yeah.
Like, oh, she's great. She just said like businesses get unfairly blamed for these things. And what can they can't always do everything. And, they thought she was their perfect juror. So, but you just got to listen to, and that's why there's open-ended questions that are just don't have a clear right answer are just so great for you assessing the jurors and keeping the good jurors from the defense because they're not listening as well as you are.
Was there a question that got her to say the 20-minute thing? So she says the question that prompted her to say that the businesses are doing the best they can was kind of what was just an open-ended, what do you think businesses' responsibilities are, to keep their property safe from spills, something like that?
I'll have to think about what that, I could look it up what that question was. It was something a little bit different than that. But I think it was one that we asked all the jurors about, property owners should or shouldn't, take into account that some people aren't being as careful as they could be. And we asked questions about, should people be as careful and on guard and vigilant walking through a store down a sidewalk as they would be if they were in a, construction worker in a construction zone.
Yeah.
Those are kind of the questions. Yeah. Because that really gets people thinking. Everybody, you start those questions by saying, obviously we should all be safe and careful. Like that's a good thing. Like no one's saying that, but how much? Like, is that ridiculous? And some jurors did tell us in that case, they were like, no, like you should be like a construction, like, and some people were like, I think a hospital is just as unsafe as a construction zone. Like there's stuff happening. There's people running out of rooms and there's stuff, on the ground or whatever they were saying. And others kind of saying, well, it depends, So I think that's kind of how we got those thoughts. But as long as you're introducing a topic and they're just kind of telling you whatever comes in their minds, that's fine. You learn more from what's popping in their minds than sometimes when they answer the question that you actually asked.
All right, let's thank our first sponsor. I'm very excited for this gentleman who has decided to support this show. He's a very good friend of mine, John Tisa of Tisa Film and Tech. He has been my trial tech, I think, for the last 10 years. And one of my first big trials, he was there working for another company. John Tisa really is just one of the best out there, a very humble guy. But if you need a trial tech, someone that is literally going to work any hours, anytime, he is available. He's quick. Makes your trials seamless, easy. He can do it all, really. We use him for literally everything technological in trial. He does our depo clips. We play a lot of depos and opening throughout our case. He'll do clips on the fly. He helps me with all my PowerPoints and opening statement. He is my right-hand man at trial. He'll sit there in the hot seat. Great with exhibits. Really, I just can't speak highly enough of John Tisa from Tisa Film and Tech. He's doing cases throughout California, but I know he's starting to expand out of state. He has an amazing team of people. When he's in trial and I need him, he always gets me someone who is top notch, so I really can put on the best case. I can't recommend John Tisa from Tisa Film and Tech enough.
If you're trying to do all that stuff on your own, man, you're missing something in terms of prepping for the actual jury. So you guys, if you're trying a case, you need somebody doing that tech and all that stuff for you after hours. I mean, after hours, you're prepping for the next plaintiff. You're not putting together like depo clips and demonstratives and things like that, right, Dan?
No, man. I mean, not at all. And that recent verdict we had in San Diego, I mean, he was working with us. We had a lot of depo clips from video witnesses, like lay witnesses, and he put together this beautiful like montage. It was almost like a documentary, just all these like things these people were saying about my client who suffered a traumatic brain injury. And he put together this thing that was like a documentary that I was able to play in closing because it was all in evidence, and it just looked so good and so clean, and the jury really liked it. So can't speak highly enough of John Tisa.
Awesome. How do you spell his last name for the viewers who want to get in touch with him, or how do you get in touch with him?
Tisa, Tisa Film and Tech, and his information will be on all of our promotional materials and all that. So John Tisa, one of the top out there. Our next sponsor, who is always supportive of our podcast and the Plaintiff's Bar, is Melissa Baldwin from Baldwin Settlements. She really is the go-to structured settlement vendor out there. She's another person that I have known for over a decade. Extremely supportive of the Plaintiff's Bar, CALA, CAOC, AAJ. She will get the best deals for your clients, get them the most money in their pockets from a structured settlement. She works great with clients who may not be that sophisticated. I had a really catastrophic injury death, or not a death, but it was nearly a death, where my client was not very sophisticated. He had some drug issues, and she was able to speak at his level and get him to do a structure that really helped set him up and his family up for the rest of their lives. Got him a great rate. She also structures attorney's fees, which is something I've started to do lately, just structuring fees so you can kind of have a little nest egg built up for either your business or yourself. Melissa Baldwin from Baldwin Settlements, really just a fantastic person, great businesswoman, a great mother, and a great friend who I highly recommend. Melissa Baldwin from Baldwin Settlements. So with that, thank you to our sponsors. Let's get back to this great show we got. Before we end this episode, going back to the 20-minute voir dire, obviously, I feel like you have to talk about money, assuming that's part of your case, which everyone listening to, I assume, is. How do you hit that? Do you do it at the end of your, like kind of the last ending questions? What's the way you get to money quickly to get enough information?
Yeah, that's a big challenge because you have to talk about money. Although I will say, in fairness, I've been on record as saying and teaching that if I have to, I feel like money is not always necessary. Like, in other words, if I feel like I know enough about how these jurors are going to get pissed off or not pissed off, I do feel pretty comfortable. But I'm not asking about money. But I think you got to try. I wouldn't be thrilled if that judge cut you off and we didn't ask a single question about money. I'd feel a little uncomfortable, but I don't think it would be the end of the world. However, I do think you got to save at least a few minutes, obviously, talk about money. Money isn't something that I think it always should come last for the most part, or late in your voir dire, because it gives a bad impression if you start asking about money up front and they're like, wait a minute,
That goes for any voir dire.
Yeah,
if you
any
have
voir dire,
a day or 20 minutes, I totally agree with that.
Yes. But I think you just have to really quickly, basically tell them what money's all about in the case, explain it in a way that you frame it the best possible way. I know, and like, for example, the kind of the way that I did it in a recent trial is just saying like, last question, got to talk about money. It's the only thing a person could ask for. in a lawsuit. It's the only way that a jury can hold a company that did something dangerous, fully accountable for the harm that they caused. And so, one thing I want to talk about is just, you have to jurors get to make an important decision about the value of someone's quality of life, even though money's never going to fix it. What are your feelings about whether you have does that seem fair, unfair? What are your thoughts about our system? And I usually will, like I said, I would advise you not to necessarily ask everybody that. Ask the jurors that you think maybe either maybe you could get for a cause if you kind of pry in that spot, or jurors who you're like, this guy seems okay, but I'm not sure. People that you're on the fence about, potential leaders that you don't feel like you have a great read on. So I would just do a subset of those people with that money question, but open-ended question. And then I would ultimately come back and just kind of have one, even though it's a group question, and kind of say, are you open to the possibility that the harm in this case could be, or that may take, many hundreds of thousands or millions or whatever you're asking for in your case, to hold a company fully accountable for the harm they caused in this case? Or does that seem excessive or unreasonable to you? So I think you got to do those two things quickly and just call on if somebody gave you like an amazing answer on liability and you're like, this juror's going to be really good, I don't think you got to talk to him. If there's someone that you're for sure going to strike, you're like, this juror's is terrible for us, I don't think you have to talk to him about money, especially if you have only a very limited amount of time. I think it's just those kind of tweeners that you have to see. If somebody gives you a great answer or gives you an answer that you're like, okay, I'm not sold on liability on this person, and they gave me an answer on damages that's not so great, maybe they got to go.
So it's really targeting, the 5, 6, 7 people that you're not sure about, hitting it, introducing the concept, and then just kind of targeting them directly, and then see where it goes from there. I guess if you get like a really bad answer, you got to find out, does anyone feel this way, that there's no way they could award over $1 million no matter what the evidence shows? Give it back to the jurors, just get some hands real quick, and then get out.
I mean, I think if a judge is giving you only 20 minutes of time or some short amount of time, I think you should at least expect them, hope that they give you some latitude on cause and you don't have to spend 5 minutes talking to a juror. And so I think you can then rapid fire questions and just say, hey, I only have a few minutes left, so I just need to do this real quick. Please tell me if you feel this way, because this is our last chance. Anybody feel like no way could a person's quality of life be worth over $1 million? It's just, I mean, no matter how injured they are, that just seems unreasonable. And, and like you get a show of hands, and you shouldn't, I don't know if you have to follow up with them. I mean, with the judge, you want to give me 5 minutes more time to talk to him, or are you going to grant the cause?
Well, that's exactly something that you have to bring up in your final status conference or right before voir dire with the judge. Be like, Your Honor, you got to fight like hell. You got to make your record, try to get as much time as possible. You have to fight that fight. I would never back away or just accept the judge doing that. Give all the reasons, do declarations, explain to them why this will get a better juror, and in fact, why you're going to be efficient and all that. You got to lay all that out. And then if he or she still doesn't budge, you have to be able to say, Your Honor, I have to be able to get cause. 30 seconds, 40 seconds per juror is going to make it almost impossible if I have to get all the case law, strike against, uphill battle, all that stuff. Be like, I'm going to ask some questions, that are going to elicit to find out who is biased. And if I get a raised hand, is that going to be enough for you, Your Honor? Because otherwise I'm going to need more time if people are going to raise their hand to show that they're biased against my case. And I think you got to do that. He or she's I feel like they got to give it some way, or else you're just making a really good record for appeal at some point.
That's all you can do.
That's all you can do.
I know. But I think you do have to ask. I mean, I said no group questions, but the truth is I think you have to ask some group questions, but you got to, those have to just be bonus questions. I mean, I think you got to only ask those group questions and get that after you've kind of heard from every juror in the box. Because like I said, there's nothing worse going back there and deciding who you're going to strike than saying, man, there's some jurors there we didn't hear a single thing from, and we don't know if we don't know anything about. I mean, that's just gambling that you shouldn't be doing. I would rather hear from every juror and have no cause than get a bunch of cause and not heard from every juror. Honestly,
right there. That's the takeaway from this episode. Rather hear from every juror than get a single cause challenge. I think that is the lesson that we should all take to heart if we are unfortunate enough to have a 20-minute voir dire. So
now that it's taken us more than 20 minutes to teach 20-minute voir dire.
It's taken us a lot longer than 20 minutes, that's for sure. But anyway, I just want to, again, thank Law Pods. Thanks our sponsors. We will see you on the next episode of Picking Justice. You be well, Harry Plotkin. I'll see you in court soon.
Yeah, I'll see you, man.
If you're enjoying the podcast, the best compliment you can give us is sharing it with a colleague who would find it valuable. For all the best clips from the podcast, follow us on social media. You can find those links in the show notes. Have a jury selection story to share? Email us at podcast@pickingjustice.com and we may address it in a future episode. Until next time, remember, you're not just picking a jury, you're picking justice. Produced and powered by Law Pods.